What's up, Charles? It's Chip from Team WJ here. As promised, I'm going to make a video on fight choreography. So I'm going to make a whole bunch of videos on this, but for this video, I want to focus on specifically what exactly I'm doing, as in how I'm laying out my fights. Literally, the steps I take to make my fights look the way they look. Now, I'm not any sort of master fight choreographer, but I do know how to fight and I pride myself in my knowledge of fighting. I like making my fights work realistically, as well as mixing in some fantasy, flashy movements into it. I've recently watched a whole bunch of videos talking about Ruby and an analysis on their fight scenes and how it's changed over time since Monty's passing. And I'd like to give my feedback on that as well. So for this video, I'm going to choreograph a scene that I'm not actually going to be using in any sort of animation, just to show you exactly what I'm doing and how I'm thinking things through. This will be a short fight scene, and it'll just be with myself. I'll be using two swords here. These two swords are from the anime Sword Art Online. I'm just going to be using them because they're what I have lying around. These are styrofoam swords that are pretty light and easy to wave around. Beforehand, I want to talk about what you need to choreograph fights. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that if you don't have any experience or even know what martial arts is, that you're going to be able to choreograph a good martial arts fight scene. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that if you don't watch any sort of MMA or combat sports, then you're going to get any sort of realistic looking fight animation. Realistic animations come from watching realistic fights. Unless you're animating two bums going at each other with zero fight experience, watching world star hip hop will not help. So this fight scene is going to be pretty simple. We're going to have my protagonist with this rapier and my antagonist with this long sword. It doesn't matter whether these are the exact swords they're going to be using in the animation. What matters is how you use them and whether they can reflect what your animation will actually look like. Before we can even choreograph the first move, we have to set out some character traits for our protagonist. First of all, he's using a rapier. Typically, a rapier is a long, pointy weapon intended for thrusting. Many people think it's lighter than other swords, but that's not the case. The balance point is simply lower, and so it feels lighter. That being said though, whenever you see a rapier, usually the person who's using the rapier moves pretty fast. So we're going to stick to that stereotype. My protagonist is also relatively skilled in martial arts and can handle himself well against his antagonist. My antagonist, on the other hand, will be using this big guy. Long swords are designed for swing attacks as well as thrusting, but you see them stereotyped as being used by medieval knights, for example. Many people seem to think that medieval armor, is very heavy and slows you down. This is not the case. People can still move very quickly while wearing armor. Modern day military armor is a lot heavier than medieval steel plate armor, so don't fall for those stereotypes. So let's get into the actual choreographing.
Okay, so I filmed myself acting as the antagonist and the protagonist, and I'll overlay them later on. But first of all, I'll go over all the actions of my protagonist and why I reached those conclusions. I actually filmed myself doing the entire process, but the footage was lost for whatever reason. I'm shooting this on my GoPro right now. So anyway, I'm thinking the antagonist will be standing where my mouse is right now, and the protagonist will run in from that corridor. So what I'm thinking of first is that the protagonist wants to come in, he's eager to finish the fight as soon as possible, as any fight should be ended. And any fight can be ended with a single strike. So we started off with a single strike. He's doing a thrust because he's using a rapier, and rapier is designed to thrust. And keep in mind, the entrance that he's using shows how fast he is because he's running in, right? So he sprints in, showing how fast he is, and he goes with a thrust. This one strike could have ended the fight. Keep that in mind. We'll build up on that. We'll start off with the first strike. That's it. Now it's time for the antagonist to respond. Of course, the fight doesn't end in a single hit. How does the antagonist respond? Well, he has to parry the sword away using his sword. He's not doing a block. A block is when you stop the enemy's momentum completely. A parry is when you allow the enemy's momentum to continue, and you can use that to your advantage. So let's see what the antagonist does to deflect/parry the initial thrust. Right now, I am the antagonist. Imagine if I was running in. To deflect the thrust, I would take a step back and to the side away from the thrust while pushing it away to the other side using my sword. So take a look at how I move my body back and to the left while my sword goes to the right. This would clear the protagonist's rapier and make it shoot across. Keep something in mind. This is not realistic right now. If I was trying to aim for realism, my sword would not go past the middle. Where my mouse is right now in the middle. I would not go past that line because once I deflect the sword, if my blade was in the middle, I could go straight for a thrust. That would end the fight right then and there. That being said though, because we're doing an animation, big, flowy, spinny movements always look better than linear, realistic movements. So let's clear that off to the side. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna make a video in the future talking about what realism actually means in a fight choreography, because many people have the confusion. Many people don't understand what realism in a fight animation actually means. So now that the sword's been parried, it's time for the antagonist to respond. Here we can introduce the theory of levels. The protagonist attacked mid-level, because he thrusted at the stomach of the antagonist. We're going to change up the levels just to give it a bit more dynamics. So we're going to change up the levels here and attack the leg. And what that's going to do is prompt the protagonist to have a different response than parry. Because realistically, you could do attack, parry, attack, parry, attack, parry, attack, parry, but that's not going to be very interesting to watch. We need to mix up some dodges in there and some movements with the characters. So because he's attacking the leg, this prompts the protagonist to use a dodge instead of another parry. So after he sprints in, there's a deflect there, and he goes for the leg, he sees it coming, and he dodges. Moves his leg out of the way, takes a step back. And look at what the rapier is doing right now. The rapier is realigned with the target. Now, if this was a big heavy sword, he could put this behind him and set it up for for a sweeping strike next. But this is a rapier, it's going to be a thrust next, everyone knows this. He's setting up, the point is facing the antagonist, and he goes for a thrust. What does the antagonist do after the leg sweep misses? So here he goes for the leg sweep, it goes across and it misses. The protagonist is going for the thrust now, he sees it coming and he does what's called a krumpal and he throws it to the side. This basically is just another parry. Now the two blades are basically stuck onto each other, we're going to go for a cliche here and do a sword bind. He's going to push the sword forward, and this will be reciprocated by the protagonist. And it'll basically become a pushing contest. Now in reality, when you get your sword stuck in a sword bind, a pushing contest is the last thing you want to do. This will blunt your blade and it won't accomplish what you want to accomplish. We can use this in our animation because a pushing contest shows, well, a struggle and a battle, and it can also be used to deliver any dialogue if necessary. Now, how we're going to solve this push and pull problem is very simple. When you push against the wall pushes back. This is Newton's first rule. Now, if you're pushing against the wall and the wall all of a sudden disappears, you're going to fall over. That's exactly what the antagonist will do. He will bait a push from the protagonist, and when the protagonist pushes, he will fade, and this will cause the protagonist to roll over. What this looks like on the antagonist side is very simple, just looks like that, and it's as simple as that. The antagonist will not give a chance for the protagonist to recover. Once the protagonist rolls over on the ground, the antagonist will immediately go for a strike. That being said though, that because the protagonist is relatively skilled and knows what he's doing, he's able to, after being rolled over, recover very quickly. He'll parry the strike away and step to the side, resetting and getting ready for the next ambush. Now he needs to take some time to think. In a real fight scenario, it's not always 100% combat. There are downtimes, there are uptimes. This is a downtime where both fighters are trying to process what's happening. What's going through the protagonist's mind right now is very simple. For the past 2 or 3 strikes, he has tried to thrust in with his rapier head on, and it hasn't worked out for him because the antagonist has been able to deflect every single attack. Now he's going to try to change it up a little bit. He's going to run in. Now I don't have space to run here, but it's just going to be like a pretend run. He's going to run in and he jumps and attacks from the side. Keep in mind, it's still a thrust. It's never going to be a sweep. Because he's changed it up so much, the antagonist doesn't see it coming. The antagonist expects another thrust straight ahead, and so he prepares for that. But to his surprise, it's a jumping sideways attack. It comes in and catches him off guard and knocks him over to the ground. He gets back up. This marks the completion of phase 1 for the protagonist. What is phase 1? It's like when you're playing a video game and you're fighting a boss, basically. When you have a boss fight, you enter the boss fight room and you don't know what the boss is going to do, so you have to experiment a little bit. You see what the boss is capable of, see how fast they move, and you basically do a lot of calculations just to see what's happening. And during all that testing and calculation, you will be taking a lot of damage. You will be beaten up until you figure out what's happening. Once you do figure out what's happening, you can exploit it to your advantage. The entire thing I just showed you just then was phase 1. The fight started off with a thrust. This was to prompt any sort of response back. Anything, right? And the protagonist was able to calculate that because he was throwing a straight-on thrust, that the antagonist would be able to parry and counter. He tries it again, and it's another counter. But at this point, he's not at a disadvantage yet. He's still testing things. To ensure that a story is exciting the entire way through, there has to be ups and downs. And so to follow a Jackie Chan rule, always start the protagonist on a lower stage. So because this hasn't been established yet, we'll establish it using this bind and we'll throw him onto the ground. This doesn't actually do any damage to him, but it just shows that the antagonist is also skilled and can take advantage of the protagonist's mistakes. This means that the protagonist is at a disadvantage. Now that he's rolled over, he's figured out what the antagonist is doing, he can start exploiting. This is what he does when he charges in with his false thrust. When he does knock the antagonist over, this marks the end of phase 1 and the beginning of phase 2. When you enter a boss fight room, in certain games, when you deal enough damage to the boss, they start shifting to a different attack pattern and start doing different things. This resets the cycle and you have to do everything you did in stage 1 again. You have to test, you have to take damage, and then you have to learn to exploit. Same thing's gonna happen. Here's what happens in phase 2 of the fight. The antagonist realizes that having a sword fight may not be favorable for him, and so he changes it up. He rushes towards the protagonist. The protagonist is so used to rushing in using his speed as his advantage that having someone rush at him is completely new to him. He will reset back to his primal instincts. He will reset back to what he's trained. Now, this does not mean that he'll throw all his martial arts training out the window like some may think. No. He's a trained martial artist. He will revert back to what he has trained, and with a rapier, what he trains is thrusts. We've already established that thrusts don't work, and the antagonist knows this. That's why he rushes in. He wants to bait that thrust completely unexpected, completely off guard from the protagonist, and that's exactly what the protagonist will do because he doesn't know what else to do. And so, on instinct, he goes to a thrust. It won't work out well for him. The antagonist rushes in, sees the thrust coming from a mile away, and uses his left hand to parry the sword away. He drops his own sword, realizing that sword fight may not be the best option for him. Instead, he closes into the distance and goes into a clinch. A clinch is basically when two people hug each other and are looking for an advantageous position. Now that he's in a clinch, the protagonist still has a sword, but the antagonist doesn't. The antagonist knows this, the protagonist knows this. The protagonist wants to retract his sword, exit the clinch, and have the advantage of having a sword. A rapier will not do you any good in a closed scenario like a clinch. Even if his sword wasn't trapped to the antagonist's body like it is now, there's no way for him to stick the point into the antagonist. There's simply not enough room to do that. The antagonist, on the other hand, realizes that the protagonist has a sword and that he doesn't, and he immediately goes for a disarm to level the playing field. The particular disarm that he uses requires taking a step back, putting his right arm through, and grabbing the rapier, and twisting it in a way that the protagonist's arm is not supposed to bend. So he pushes back, feeds his right arm through, grabs it across, and rotates it over. What it looks like on the protagonist side, keep in mind, the rapier is currently trapped to the antagonist's body. He's hugging it tight. And so, he'll take a step back, feed it through, and keep on twisting it. The protagonist's arm does not bend that way, and so the sword will be disarmed. Now they're still in a clinch, but neither of them want to be in the clinch. Neither of them are clinch fighters, so they push each other away. Boom. And that separates distance. This is another downtime. Now both fighters are disarmed. It's turned from a sword fight into a fist fight. You could be very meta here and have the protagonist throw only straight punches while the antagonist throws wide punches, but I didn't think this through. I mean, I'd really just wing this choreograph. So he comes in with this haymaker. A haymaker is a really wide, powerful punch that doesn't require much skill at all. So the protagonist sees it coming from a mile away, ducks under, and returns with a right overhand. Bam, and this collides straight into the antagonist's face. But these guys are tough and they won't go down in a single hit. Both of them know this, and so the protagonist starts loading up his second punch. It's gonna be an uppercut. Bam, it collides, good. At this point, just because you're taking hits doesn't mean you stop fighting back. The antagonist has taken 2 hits, but he's still gonna fight back. He's gonna throw a wide left. It's gonna be another haymaker left. Protagonist sees this coming, ducks it, and goes up with a shovel hook to the body. This stuns the antagonist, sends him back a little bit, and the protagonist realizes that this combination is over. No combination in any realistic fight goes over like 10 hits. 10 hits is an amazing combination. Most combinations are like 3 to 4. So he realizes the end of the combination, and so he pushes the guy away and ends it with a leg kick. It's a very common way to end combinations in real life fighting scenarios, and this causes another downtime. Now this marks the end of phase 2 because the protagonist has figured out all the antagonist's move. the antagonist now needs to change up his attack a little bit. The antagonist has actually learned the response of the protagonist. He came in with a haymaker and realized that the protagonist will duck, so he's going to do the exact same thing. He's looking to rush in with a haymaker. Except, shocker, it's not a haymaker. The protagonist has ducked his head, ready to do the exact same move again, but because he's ducked his head, he's walked right into this bolo uppercut. The bolo uppercut and the haymaker have the exact same setup, and it's impossible to tell which one will come. This is a realistic fight move, and the protagonist has just fallen for it. He's taken an uppercut to the face, direct impact. His face was going to the punch was going to his face. He's really stunned right now. He's wide open. The antagonist sees this, takes advantage of it. His right leg is now winded up for a direct groin kick right up the middle, straight into the groin. And this groin kick basically makes our protagonist bend over in pain. His head is now lowered to waist level, which means it's really easy for our antagonist to take advantage of this and throw a roundhouse kick to the face. This knocks our protagonist down to the ground. Now the protagonist is stunned and on the ground, we start looking at the weapons again. The weapons are down there for a reason, and they have not moved for a reason. The longsword down there is now being picked up by our antagonist as he's going to finish him off like so. This right now is called half swording. You can grab the blade of the sword without being cut up. The only way a sword can cut you up is if it moves around, or if you grab it really hard and you're really trying to cut yourself. Half swording was a technique used by medieval knights. There are many historical documents showing this technique in use, and it was very effective at targeting specific spots of the human body. To wind up this attack, the protagonist right now will recover, and this is how he'll get out of the situation. Keep in mind the rapier is right there. He's been knocked over, he's stunned. The antagonist is setting up his strike. The protagonist, he realizes his sword is right there. He sees it. He goes, oh, it's right there. He turns around, sees what the antagonist is doing, sees that he's winding up. The antagonist's sword is coming down right now. The protagonist must react. He kicks it out of the way, starts rolling over. If the blade is coming down at his head, watch the blade, it comes down at his head. The first kick kicks it behind his head, so it lands somewhere behind. The second kick with the other leg kicks the sword away, and so basically disarms him. This allows the protagonist to roll over. That's what kicks it away. Yeah, there you go. That's what kicks the sword away. He rolls over, grabs the sword. Let's watch that again. So gets it out of his head, right? So it stabs behind him. Rolls over, kicks the sword, disarms it. Grabs the sword now, swings it over with all the momentum possible. This doesn't need to cut in. All this is targeting is a weak spot on the human body, and that's behind the knees. Especially if your opponent is wearing armor. You can't have armor behind your knees, otherwise it won't be able to bend. That's a weak spot, and that's what our protagonist hits. This causes our antagonist to bend over and fall to the ground. Our protagonist now climbs on top of him and uses the pommel of the sword, which is the back of the sword, to finish off his target. Bam. What this looks like in the antagonist perspective, he's gonna go down, and look how that gets deflected away, gets disarmed, and the back of his knee is now a viable target. He gets hit and sends him crumbling down to the ground. He's clutching it in pain. He could have been cut, or it could just have hurt really badly. It really doesn't matter. All that matters is that he's been sent down to the ground. And now that the protagonist is climbing on top of him, he tries to cover his face, but it's a pommel. A pommel is a very heavy metal object coming down at your face. You're not going to be able to block that. Boom, and he's out. That's what it takes to choreograph a fight. This was a very simple choreograph, and I'm not going to animate this at all. You can use this if you want in your animations, but please credit me if you do. But this is what the base choreograph for the animation would look like. While you're animating, you're going to realize that there's a lot more opportunities for your characters to take. There will be a lot more fancier moves that could change up the entire choreograph, but you need a starting point to work off of, and I find that doing this is a very good option. As promised, here's what everything looks like overlaid. Now, I'm not used to doing this, and I don't usually do this, but it's just really cool to see what everything looks like when you put everything together, and it really kind of brings it to life without me having to animate it. And I did make several mistakes, like I didn't know where I was standing in respective to my other self at times. Most of the time, everything looks good. So right here's the jumping scene. I think this turned out probably really well, actually. There we go. Now here's where I got confused. I wasn't sure what I was standing, but it's basically a disarm. If you look at the guy with the rapier, right about now, yeah, there you go. The rapier is actually trapped to the arm, and here's what the disarm looks like. There you go. Because he just brought it across and rolled it over, basically. As for this turned out relatively okay. I kind of missed all my punches, but it was alright. Kind of get the gist of it. I hope my explanation during the main video was alright. Anyway, there's a whole lot more I want to say about animating and fight choreography and all that sort of stuff, so make sure you subscribe and hit that bell icon if you don't want to miss out. I make tutorials every Monday, live streams on Thursday, and upload this sort of stuff on Wednesday. I would love to have you as part of our channel in our quest to enhance your animations and tell your stories. Cheers!